Hello, everybody watching. So, you don't believe in conspiracy theories, right? Yeah, they are for nutters and crackpots. We know. But what do you make of this? We write the year 1776 and 50 men conspire against the British Crown. They take part in a conspiracy to bring down British rule of Northern America. They sign the Declaration of what? Independence, right? On the territory we know now as what? The United States of America, because this conspiracy was carried out successfully. Yes, it was a conspiracy, which is defined as a secret arrangement of two or more people for gain of power or money, or to fight in secret against an evil government, which the British Crown was in the eyes of most Americans. So let's presume you, on the other hand, are a British patriot and true to the Crown and King Charles, despite all his scandals, saying, yeah, those Americans, look at them. They should never have left British rule. Look at what they have done. Look at what they are. Okay, just look at the weird way they're talking and insult against the King's English, right? Mr. Gandhi will find that it takes much more than a pinch of salt to bring down the British Empire. So now you are in possession of a time machine, let's presume, and you go back to the year 1776 just in time to warn the British Crown that there is a conspiracy taking place and that this has to be prevented. These conspirators have to be punished for high treason. They need to be, hung, drawn, quartered, cut their entrails out, and burnt. But what you are not is in the possession of written proof, like the document itself, which is well preserved, protected, and kept in Washington, D.C. And so you are what? When you stand in front of King George III with empty hands and no proof, you are right, you are a conspiracy theorist. And you will get laughed at and called a nutter and sent home, right? Okay. Because when you don't have real proof of a conspiracy taking place, like the official governmental executive order to fake the attacks of the 11th of September 2001 to get the go-ahead by the American people to invade Iraq and Afghanistan, because the written documents simply never existed or have now been destroyed, and witnesses have now been bribed or murdered, and you can only come up with evidence, sound evidence, but no real proof. You are stating a what? A conspiracy theory, right? So then, what about this Alibaba and the 40 thieves? No, wait, that was a fairy tale. But what about this Ali bin Laden and his 18 thieves, the terrorists, that conspired, took place in a conspiracy to bring down the twins on September 11th, 2001 by hijacking planes. But there is no proof behind this story, only filthy lies. But oh yes, the 3 buildings have just been vaporized, like we have never seen any of this before on Earth. They have just turned to dust that was gone by the wind. But hell yeah, there was a passport photo, Mohammed Atta. They really have no shame of fabricating such an outrageous lie. Well, the good chap is probably still alive somewhere. They had just stolen his passport when he was on a visit to the States. Well, if he had not been silenced now by the CIA. Yeah, that is what I call a conspiracy theory, and you don't believe in this kind of crap. And yeah, you better don't, because this government official conspiracy theory is the most laughable one about 9/11 there is, with no proof at all, only lies and fake witnesses and a fabricated story from start to finish. So if you believe in this, you are the nutter of nutters. You are so dependent on the lies the media is cramming into your head, you are a hopeless case. And here is why. Well, because even if the terrorists could have hijacked all 4 planes, the US has the best air defense system in the world. Fighter jets would have been scrambled right away and forced those planes to land. Although, strangely enough, an exercise was held on that very day. And Bin Laden knew that, of course, because he was a friend of the Bush family, and probably is still now with a new identity. But even if the hijacks of these planes could have flown in the alleged maneuvers, which is impossible, yes, the best pilots in the world could not fly them on the flight simulator, especially not that ludicrous maneuver into the Pentagon, then they would have broken apart, because only fighter jets can fly such speeds at ground level without breaking apart. So there were no planes, there were just digital projections. Because the whole world only got footage from one single television station, which spread them, totally unquestioned, worldwide through the global media cartel, and were repeated over and over again. The more often a lie is repeated, the more likely it is to be believed, right? But even if the planes had been able to fly into the buildings, which is impossible, they would have crashed beforehand without any effect, since actio is the same as reactio. That is, the aircraft would have received the same damage as it would have if it had been hit, standing motionlessly in the air. Yeah, let's think of Douglas Adams, his flying building, by an 800 kilometer per hour fast flying mountain of a building, reinforced concrete and all. That plane would have flown apart in 1,000 shreds, and the flying building would have only had a few windows less. But even if the planes had been able to fly in it, the exploding fuel had completely melted the steel on the floor, which is impossible. Nothing else would have happened, because those buildings simply cannot be destroyed in this way, since they are basically a single concrete-clad vertical massive column made of high-quality steel. But even if one floor had been completely gone, which is impossible, the tower would only have bent, or only the top floors would have fallen down. But even if an asteroid the size of Manhattan had fallen down on it, the tower would have only been bent. It would not have collapsed. But even if the whole building had burnt out, it would not have collapsed, because all over the world there are many thousands of these buildings and are still being built in exactly the very same way. And although there have been such buildings that have burnt out for days, they have not collapsed because they are collapse proof. All over the world, in all history, only 3 of these buildings have ever collapsed after fire, and those were World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7. But even if the 2 buildings had collapsed right after the plane flew in, which is impossible, there was still World Trade Center 7, which was not hit by any plane but collapsed anyway. We remember when the BBC said that the building had collapsed when it was still standing. But even if all 3 buildings had collapsed, which is impossible, it could not have happened in free fall, because that is the speed at which buildings collapse after the steel columns have been blown up in a controlled demolition. But even if the floors had collapsed in a domino effect, which is impossible, the upper burning floors would have to work their way through intact floors, and that would have taken some time. But even if they had collapsed in free fall after fire and not after blasting, which is impossible, not so much dust would have developed, because after controlled demolition there is not very much dust, yet a high pile of rubble is formed. But here the whole building just crumbled to dust. Even steel girders did so, and were gone by the wind. But even if it would be likely that everything collapsed and crumbled to dust and not formed a pile of rubble, which is impossible, ground zero should have cooled down in days, but it remained hot for months. But even if everything had just gone according to what they told us about the collapse of the World Trade Center, which is impossible, why did the owner, Larry Silverstein, then had it insured against terror just in time and thereby made a fortune? Especially since the demolition of the unprofitable and asbestos-contaminated buildings would have devoured astronomical sums of money, which is why they were not allowed to blow it up. It would have had to be removed by excavator only under special protective precautions. And why was he not in the building that day of all things, although he usually sat there every day in his office and coordinated the attack? But even if the plane had flown into the Pentagon, which is impossible. It should not have left a single hole like after a cruise missile hit. And it would probably not have coincidentally flown right into the office of an inspection squad investigating the $3 trillion of taxpayers' money embezzled by the Bush and Cheney administration. But even if the fourth plane, which they claim was targeting the White House, had crashed at full speed near Shanksville, there should have been a hole in the ground and debris, but there was nothing to be seen, as if the plane had been swallowed up by the ground. But even if all of this had occurred, as they say, right, which is impossible, Telecom would not have broadcasted that ghost plane commercial spot just the day before. How an airplane flew through a skyscraper completely unscathed. This ad was discontinued the very day after, and today you can't find that spot anywhere. But even if all this had happened, which is impossible, then director Zemeckis would probably not have hidden about 10 coded but very clear references to 9/11 and the fall of the World Trade Center in his film Back to the Future. But even if you think that these clues are just coincidence, which is impossible, then he wouldn't have let Marty say in 1985 that Doc Brown would find out in 30 years what that information about the future was all about, while that wire was in the frame, and he wouldn't have released the movie The Walk exactly 30 years after 1985, where a high-wire artist balances on a tightrope between the two towers of the World Trade Center, and the actor was also dressed just as Marty in the movie Back to the Future. Dear spectator, all in all, the probability that these events took place as the global corporate media worldwide says is only 1 in a trillion. Thanks for watching, and please share.